Welcome to Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched, first-person simulation of history's most interesting people. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these fascinating lives. Now, let's meet our guest. Today, I have the distinct honor of speaking with a titan of science fiction, the one and only Octavia Butler. Octavia, for those who may somehow not know who you are you?
I am Octavia Estelle Butler, and I am a writer. I spent my life creating stories that explored the human condition, often through the lens of science fiction, looking at how we navigate power, change, and our own inherent nature.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Pasadena, California, on June 22nd, 1947.
What was your given name at birth?
My given name is Octavia Estelle Butler.
Is there a story behind your birth name?
I was named after my mother, Octavia Margaret Guy, though I always went by my own name. It was simply the name I was given, a connection to the woman who raised me.
What was your hometown like growing up?
Pasadena was a complicated place. On the surface, it was a quiet, typical California town, but underneath, it was deeply segregated. I grew up in the Northwest Quadrant, surrounded by people who worked incredibly hard, just as my mother did. It was a place where I felt like an outsider, and I think that sense of being other really shaped my perspective as a writer.
What was your family life like?
My father worked as a shoe shine man, but he passed away when I was only 7 years old. That left my mother to raise me on her own. She worked as a maid in the homes of wealthy families, and often I would accompany her to work. Seeing the difference between our lives and the lives of those we worked for had a profound impact on me. She was a woman of limited formal education, but she was incredibly determined that I would have opportunities she never had.
What kind of kid were you?
I was tall, gawky, and painfully, tiresomely shy. I was also a daydreamer. I struggled in school with dyslexia, which made me feel like I was constantly falling behind. I was often lonely, so I found a sanctuary in the public library. That library was my second home, and the world of books, fantasy and science fiction especially, was where I felt I truly belonged.
What were your biggest fears growing up?
Being different. I felt so out of place among other children my age. I feared not fitting in, and I feared the limitations that the world seemed to want to place on me. Writing became my way of overcoming that fear. I could create my own worlds where I didn't have to be the person people expected me to be.
What did you dream of becoming as a child?
Before I knew I wanted to be a writer, I was just a girl who loved stories. But when I was around 9 or 10, I saw a science fiction movie that was so poorly written, I thought to myself, I can write a better story than this. That was the moment. From then on, I knew I was going to be a writer.
What were some of your favorite activities in school?
Honestly, writing stories in my notebooks. While other kids were focused on school activities, I was filling dozens of notebooks with my own observations, ideas, and early drafts. I wasn't the typical student, but I was always observing, always learning, and always reading.
What was your first job?
I had a series of odd jobs before I could write full time. I worked as a telemarketer, a potato chip inspector, a dishwasher, and a warehouse worker. Those jobs weren't glamorous, but they gave me the time to write. I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to write before heading to work, determined to make my dream a reality.
Was there a moment where you realized you were different from everyone else?
I think I knew that almost as soon as I entered school. I felt out of step with my peers. And the fact that I was a young, shy, African-American girl writing science fiction in a genre that was almost entirely dominated by white men certainly solidified that sense of being an outsider.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
Begging my mother for a library card. It seemed like such a small, everyday request, but it opened up the entire world to me. Without access to those books, I don't know that I would have ever found the language to tell my own stories.
What was your biggest break?
It wasn't one single break so much as a series of small, persistent steps. But taking a writing workshop with Harlan Ellison was a significant turning point. He encouraged me to attend the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop, and the connections and encouragement I received there were invaluable.
What were your biggest struggles before success?
Rejection. I faced so much of it. And of course, the constant struggle to balance my writing life with the demands of working to survive. There were years where I would write for hours before dawn, only to spend my day in a factory or a warehouse. It was exhausting, and the uncertainty of whether I would ever make it was always there.
Did you ever consider quitting?
Of course, it would have been much easier to just give up and accept a more conventional life, but I couldn't. The urge to write, the stories that were inside me, they didn't leave me alone.
Were there any specific daily habits or routines that you feel are essential to your success?
Discipline. I learned that you cannot wait for inspiration. You have to write every single day, regardless of how you feel. My routine was waking up before dawn to write. It was the only way to ensure my work was the priority, even when life was pulling me in other directions.
What job would you have had if fame never happened?
I don't know that I ever thought about it as fame. I just wanted to be a professional writer. If that hadn't worked out, I likely would have continued working in various roles, perhaps in a library or a warehouse, but I would have kept writing, regardless of whether anyone ever read it.
What was your life like before fame?
It was focused, it was quiet, it was full of reading, writing, and the daily grind of working to pay the rent. I lived a relatively solitary life, which gave me the space to think and create.
How did relationships change after success?
People began to see me differently. When you achieve a certain level of recognition, it changes how others perceive you and interact with you. It created a bit of a distance, which I think reinforced my natural inclination to be a bit of a hermit.
Did fame bring happiness?
It brought the ability to write full time, which was the greatest happiness I could have asked for. It meant I could spend my days doing what I loved, which was everything.
What was the downside of becoming famous?
The loss of anonymity. I liked being able to observe the world without being observed in return. Fame brings expectations from others that can sometimes feel like a constraint.
What misconceptions did people have about you?
People sometimes assumed I was a pessimist because of the dark themes in my work. In reality, I was a realist. I was looking at the world as it was and as it could be, which is a different thing entirely.
What was your darkest moment?
Losing my father when I was so young was incredibly difficult. It left a void in my life, and for a long time, I think I struggled to find my footing.
What past regrets did you carry that you spoke about?
I think most writers always feel they could have done better, that a story could have been sharper or a character more fully realized. I was a perfectionist with my work, so I was always looking back at what I had done and thinking about how to improve it.
What's something people misunderstood about your life?
That I was lonely because I was solitary. I was comfortably asocial. I enjoyed my own company and the company of my characters. Solitude wasn't a punishment. It was my environment.
Tell me about a time when everything went wrong and how did you handle it?
There were many times when a story just wouldn't work, when I was struggling with writer's block, or when a manuscript was rejected yet again. I handled it by going back to work. I'd sit down, I'd write, and I'd try to figure out where I had gone wrong. Persistence is the only answer to things going wrong.
Did fame and fortune change your life?
It gave me more time. That was the most valuable thing. It meant I didn't have to work in a warehouse to pay my bills, so all of my energy could go into my craft.
What personal battles were you fighting privately?
Like many people, I struggled with self-doubt and the weight of perfectionism. There were health struggles as well, and the ongoing challenge of staying focused and productive in a world that often didn't seem to be built for a person like me.
What was life like in your final years?
I moved to Seattle. It was a change of scenery, a bit quieter. I was still writing, still working on new ideas, but I was dealing with my health and the toll that years of hard work had taken.
What were you working on in your career before you passed away?
My last novel was fledgling, a vampire story that allowed me to reimagine and play with that lore in my own way. I was always thinking about the next story.
When and where and how did you pass away, and how old were you?
I passed away in February 2006, outside my home in Washington, when I was 58 years old.
What's a random fact about you most people have never heard?
I had a very specific, almost oil and water combination of traits. I was a mix of ambition and laziness, insecurity and absolute certainty, all driving me forward.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you?
I think people often had ideas about me that were far more complex than the reality. I was just a woman who liked to tell stories.
What was your most unique habit?
The 2 a.m. writing sessions. Most people think of writers as working in the afternoon, but I found the quiet of the very early morning to be the most conducive to thinking.
What was your favorite food?
I didn't have one specific favorite, but I certainly appreciated a good meal that gave me the energy to keep working.
Did you have a favorite restaurant?
No, I was a very private person. I much preferred cooking for myself or having a simple meal where I could be left alone with my thoughts.
What was your favorite book?
That's an impossible question for a writer to answer. I was inspired by so many, from the classics to the science fiction magazines I devoured as a child. Anything that transported me to a new way of thinking was a favorite.
Did you have any known rivalries?
No, I didn't have time for rivalries. I was too busy competing with myself to be a better writer.
Tell us a story nobody talks about.
There are many, but I often think about the times I would go to the archives to research Kindred. People see the finished book, but they don't see the hours I spent digging through history, trying to understand not just the facts, but the feeling of what it was like to survive. That kind of work is quiet, often invisible, but it's the heart of the storytelling.
What's your funniest behind-the-scenes moment?
I think the funniest moments were when I realized just how much my characters would take over my life. I would be at the grocery store or doing a mundane task, and I'd be so lost in a conversation one of my characters was having that I'd realize I hadn't heard a word anyone else said.
Did you ever prank someone?
Not really. I wasn't much of a prankster. I preferred the internal adventures of my own mind.
What was the most outlandish purchase you made?
I wasn't one for outlandish purchases. I was very practical, even after I had success. My greatest luxury was time.
What advice would you give people chasing success?
Be persistent. Don't wait for inspiration to strike, because it won't always be there. If you have a story to tell or work you want to do, you have to be disciplined enough to do it even when it's hard, even when you're tired, and even when the world tells you no.
Octavia, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we sign off, do you have any closing remarks about this interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with our listeners?
It was a pleasure to look back on this life. My only hope for those listening is that they continue to read, continue to question, and that they find the courage to tell their own stories, whatever those may be. Thank you, Calvin, for having me.
That was truly a fascinating look into the life and mind of a visionary. We talked about her upbringing in Pasadena, the incredible discipline that fueled her writing, and the deep human truths she embedded in her science fiction. Thank you, Octavia, for coming on the show. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.